Hello, what I'm going to go through in this video is variable scope within Python. So a variable created inside a function can only be accessed by statements inside that function and ceases to exist when the function is exited. The variable is recreated each time the function is called. The variable is set to be local to the function or to have local scope. The same is true for the function's parameters. Variables that are assigned outside all functions are said to exist in the global scope. A variable that exists in the global scope is called the global variable. A variable must be one or the other. It cannot be both local and global. If variables created in two different functions have the same name, they have no relationship to each other. They are treated as completely different variables. The same is true for the parameters of functions. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and look at a few programs so that we can to demonstrate global and local scope. So let me bring up the first one here. So what we have in this program, if you look at the main program, we're setting the variable x equals to 2, and then what we're doing is we're printing out x, and then after that we're calling the trivial function, and then within the trivial function we're creating a variable called x and setting it equal to 3, then we're printing out x, and then we're returning back, and within our main program we're printing out the value of x. So let me go ahead and run this module. So what happens is it prints out 2 is global. In the function x is actually equal to 3, so it prints out 3, and then it prints out 2 when it gets back into the main program. Since our global variable x equals 2 is a global variable, whereas x equals 3 within our trivial function is actually a local variable. So let me just go ahead and we're going to walk through this code really quick. In the Python tutorial, and let me go ahead and visualize the execution of this. So I'll click on forward. And then as you can see, basically what it's done is it's created a scope called global over on the left. So if we just go ahead and proceed, what this is telling us is x equals 2 in this case is of global scope. If I go ahead and click on forward, it prints out 2 is global. Then I call my trivial function. So once I call my trivial function and move to the next line, and then move to line number 3, after line 2 is executed, a new variable, x variable, gets created that our function trivial is going to use. So you can see that it is its own separate variable. We have the global variable called x under global, and we have the trivial variable called x under our trivial function. So once I click forward, it'll go ahead and it'll print out the value, which is 3 in my function. And then if I go ahead and click forward one more time, then basically after we move out of our function, basically the x that was underneath our trivial function no longer exists in memory, but the x still exists at a global level. So we'll click on forward, and then basically it prints out my global. So if I just go ahead and add one more call to trivial here, and I'll walk through this really quick. So we'll walk through the main statements here. The first call to trivial, continue walking through. So after we leave the trivial function, basically it does not, the x variable within trivial does not exist. We print out global, we call trivial again, And then what happens is x, the variable x, gets created again in memory associated with the next call to our trivial function. We go ahead, move one more, it'll print 3, it'll go ahead and exit, and then x still exists at the global level, but after the program is done, it will no longer exist. So that is one example of global and local scope. The next thing I'm going to do is I am going to go back into idle, and I'm going to open up another file, and it'll be scope 2. So what we have here is we're making a call to trivial, and then within trivial we're going ahead and establishing a variable and x and setting the value equal to 5. And then what we're attempting to do after the call to trivial is we're attempting to print out x. So if I go ahead and run this program, what we're going to run into is we're actually going to run into a name error. Name x is not defined in line 6, so when we try to print out x, since we did not define x at a global scope, we cannot access the variable x within the function, because after the function gets executed, that x variable no longer exists, and an exception gets thrown. So basically what we're doing is we're trying to access a local variable that's at a local scope within our main program, which you cannot do. And then if you need to modify a global variable from within a function, you'll use the global statement. So let me just go ahead and open up my next example. So what we're doing in this program is we're setting x equals to 0, then we're printing out the value of x, and then we're calling our function trivial. But this time what we want to do, instead of creating a local variable called x, we want to go ahead and update the global variable. So in order to do that within a function, you can just specify the global keyword, and then you can specify x. So that tells the Python interpreter that we do not want to create a new variable called x. We want to go ahead and modify the global variable called x. So in the next statement, we're adding 7 to x, then we're printing it out, and then we're moving back into our final line and printing out the value of x again. So if I go ahead and run this module, what we'll see is at first the value is 0, and then we go ahead and then within our trivial function we use our global keyword, so that allows us to modify a global variable called x. So we add 7 to it. It's 7 within our function, and then it's also 7 within our main program. So let me just go ahead and copy and paste this into our tutorial here. And we will visualize execution of this. So we'll move to forward, we'll put x equals to 0, we'll print out the value, we'll call our trivial function. Basically what it does is it just skips through this, so now you can see within our trivial function, if I click on forward, a variable of x does not get created underneath our function. That variable, what we're using is the global variable. So if I click on forward, we'll go ahead and we'll print out our function, and then if we go to the next statement, we'll print out the value of x, which has been increased to 7. So that kind of just walks you through a little bit about local and global scope and then the use of the global statement. So that's all I have for this video, so we will talk to you next time.